Let's maul in the Central Committee. Let's cringe in the Central Committee. Let's bog in the Central Committee right now.
Can I ask you, when you say socialist, what do you mean when you say socialist then? I'm trying to understand what this means. Can you give me like a cohesive, coherent?
That's good. No, let me answer. There are a variety. I'll give you 3 basic strains right now. They don't exhaust it, but they'll enable us to have a conversation. 1 strain, you leave enterprises in the hands of private capitalists, but you recognize that that capitalist system is so flawed, for example, in terms of inequality, in terms of business cycle instability.
Okay, so he's going to describe different tendencies within socialism, which means different ideas that people have about approaching an idea of an economy that's focused on human flourishing rather than profit, right? And so there's a lot of different ideas for how you might approach that goal. These are all forms of socialism. The idea of claiming that someone is not truly socialist is a rhetorical strategy that people that are advocating one of these different forms are going to take to say, this is why you should approach my idea over someone else's idea. That doesn't make them not socialist. Oh, God. So I think what Destiny's going to do is, for every argument for which there is no empirical debate, he's going to say that's not really socialism. And for every idea that hasn't been fully tried, he's going to say, never been tried, Pepe Law. Is that basically the strategy we're about to see? We are basically witnessing an office hours of a professor talking to a freshman debate lord at Econ 101. Yeah, God.
That you give a role to the government of massive intervention, rules, regulations, laws. You know, let me give you some examples. In France, it's the law that once you begin working after graduating from high school or college, every employer has to give you 5 weeks of paid vacation from the beginning. Nothing like that exists in the United States. But this is a society that won that for its people, by the way, by socialists who did that, and put that on the books, as it is on most European countries. And socialists do that because they believe for them that socialism is when the government comes in and regulates. That's one kind. Here's a second kind. These second kind of socialists, they don't believe it works real well if you do that. It's not enough. So they want to take a different step. They want the government to come in and actually own and operate enterprises, not merely regulate them with rules and laws. Then there's a third kind, which I stressed a few moments ago, which is not about the government. Doesn't care all that much whether the government runs an enterprise or the private does. They can figure out, whichever one works better. Let's be real practical. But for them, what socialism means is the transformation of the everyday life of working people. No longer do you go to work with other people telling you what to do, where to sit, what machine to use, what raw material to work on. And at the end of the day, you go home and you've got nothing more to say about what you poured your brains and muscles into. No, no, no. For these socialists, like me, the crucial thing is to reorganize the workplace, to bring real democracy, can you believe it, to the place where we work. In a country that claims to be democratic, we don't have democracy in the workplace. We have a tiny group of people telling the majority what to do, fully unaccountable to that majority. You know, if we really believed in democracy, this kind of socialism argues, we would recognize that that's where adults spend most of their adult life, at work. And if you really believe in democracy, it should have been installed in the workplace. But capitalism doesn't permit that. The folks at the top want to keep the power to keep their inordinate wealth, even at the expense of no democracy and of a growth record.
If I could critique Wolff here just one bit, what I would say is it would be good to talk about what are the goals of socialism as far as the moral goals. Like what are the kind of assumptions that go into why you would pursue a socialist politic? And I think that might be a useful thing to talk about going forward.
Inferior to what Russia did in the 20th century.
He's receiving a free college education,
curious. Doing now. And that's an enormous price to pay.
Okay, so if you want to talk about the 2 and 3 definitions of socialism, that would be interesting to me. But I only heard 2 definitions of socialism here. Number 1 is just capitalism. I don't know when this like redefining happened of taking capitalism plus government intervention and calling it. Wait. Well, let me finish. Right.
Okay.
I don't
know because he never read a book on social democracy.
This was the case that state intervention into private markets to have some form of regulation or some form of socialized healthcare or giving workers 5 weeks off became socialism. It is clearly not socialism. It's so not socialism that I think Marx himself even said that the state would be heavily required in maintaining capitalism, more so than.
Of course, the state created capitalism. Corporations are legal fictions. They're fictional persons. You can't have a corporation without a government. This is blatantly obvious. It's great to have opinions I have no information on. The reason why Professor Wolff brought that up, because those are transitional, the socialists who want regulation was advanced by people who opposed liberal economics. Liberals believed that markets gave the best outcomes. And then it was proven that markets don't give the best outcomes. And then leftist thought came in and began to regulate and intervene to correct those deficiencies. Those are not liberal positions.
Then I guess even Marx was able to foresee, because he predicted a revolution of the proletariat in his lifetime. The idea that the state intervening and providing some sort of social welfare or safety net is that's just strictly a capitalist system with some government intervention. If we want to talk about the concept of the government owning and operating enterprises, or number 3, the idea is that the workers themselves have some like worker managed thing, I would be interested in discussing either of those 2 options, as I believe all 5 questions I laid out initially applied to them. But for number 1, I wholly reject that as a form of as a form of socialism. If you believe it is, I'd be curious if you can tell me what is the difference between the first thing you laid out and any capitalist that acknowledges that some level of government intervention is necessary in keeping the economy going.
I'd be glad to explain it to you. The history of socialism gets going in the middle of the 19th century. And at that time, socialists began to argue that capitalism was over, capitalism was done, and a better system was available and should be pursued.
Professor, thanks for the 521
They had a whole bunch of ideas about that.
Tactical Edward,
They were a relatively small group, if you know the history
that's
of Marx.
Vouch. Sorry, Vouch is Tactical Edward. This is Edward Andy. He just defends
the use of the Andy. As the 19th
N-word.
century progresses, it gets larger and larger. And guess what happens when that movement gets larger? Debates begin to happen inside of it as to what in the world capitalism is and what in the world socialism is. And here we go. Some of the people decided that socialism as a radically alternative system wasn't in the cards. Could never happen in some views, could only happen in a distant future. Well, what then did socialists do in the meanwhile before a real change of system happened? Answer: advocate for the government to be taken over by universal suffrage. The mass of people would institute a socialism that was, if you like, a step in that direction, an early socialism, if you like. And by the way, there were big debates, pro and con, within the socialist movement about this. But they settled to understand, let's call it one kind of socialism. And that's what you have in Western Europe, in Scandinavia, to this day. Socialist parties advocate that, and the people in that society often vote those folks into power. I'll give you an example. The government in Portugal right now, a perfect example, European country. The government of Portugal is a coalition of 3 political parties. The largest is the Portuguese Socialist Party. The second one is the Portuguese Communist Party. And the third one is the Portuguese Green Party. They were elected as a coalition government in 2016.
But they're not socialists, Professor Wolff, and they're not real communists because they exist within the society today. So because they haven't destroyed all private property instantly, they're not real socialists. By the way, how is Portugal doing? You know, how is Portugal doing? Where progressives are winning, Portugal's Socialist Alliance soundly defeated its challengers on the right, offering rare good news for the left in Europe. Oh, socialists lead Portugal out of crisis. Portugal's economy has been booming since the socialist government rejected austerity measures demanded by the EU. Portugal's socialists prepare 4 more years in government. So, I mean, I'm not saying that they're perfect. They're not. But, like, come on.
Last year. Parenthetically, if your audience members don't know about this...
We are doing better thanks to the left bloc and Communist Party, pressure on the Socialist Party, but the far right is growing a lot. You guys have, like, the smallest far right in Europe.
That's because you live in a society that doesn't tell you about this, even though it's public knowledge to anyone interested in finding out. Those parties push a socialist agenda.
Let's Google Portugal.
By which they mean government rules and regulations. You may not like to call it socialists, but the people involved, and millions of them around the world, do.
So the reason why I bring up Portugal is because the Socialist and Communist parties and Green Party of Portugal did the opposite that the neoliberals said to do. The neoliberals said your economy is shrinking, you have a deficit, you need to cut social services, you need to shrink your government spending, you need to pay off your debts, cut the government provision of services and send more money to the bankers that hold notes on your economy. And the socialists and communists said, fuck your austerity. We're going to fund schools. We're going to not cut the budget. We're going to expand the budget. We're going to step in and try to alleviate the harms in our society. And they said, fuck you to the neoliberal consensus. And all the neoliberals, like Destiny, screeched, Portugal, they're the pigs, they're terrible, they're going to collapse, they're overspending, their debt is going to be too high. Whoops-a-daisy, that didn't happen. Portugal's economy recovered, and they're starting to come out of the situation, which is why they won another election, because people see that they manage the economy and manage policy really well. Some of the other things they've done, decriminalize all drugs. They ended the drug war in Portugal. It was a resounding and complete success. Addiction down. Crime down. Whoops. So, yes, am I saying the Portugal Socialist Party is it not doing enough? Yes, it's not doing enough. But the point is that they bucked this like neoliberal consensus and have gone firmly to the left side of politics in the 21st century, and it worked tremendously well.
Kind of socialism broke away from this first kind. In the aftermath of the Soviet Revolution, they were in favor of taking that extra step. Socialism for them meant that the government should take over and operate enterprises, at least the industrial ones, maybe later the agricultural ones. And to underscore their distinction from the other socialists who just wanted government rules, regulations, and controls, they gave themselves the name communist.
Exactly.
And that's the only difference between them, and it has been that way for nearly a century now, since the Russian Revolution. And then there's this third one, which has to do with transforming the workplace. Those are all socialisms. They argue, they debate, they have a rich literature. We have lots of empirical examples.
And also you could share ideas between them. Like you could have part of the economy where you go towards a stronger state-owned, state-run firms. You could have part of the economy where it's heavily regulated and controlled, and you could have part of the economy where you grow worker cooperatives and control. You could have a blend of those, but it would be taking power away from private ownership of the means of production towards democratic control for the purpose of human flourishing and advancing society as a whole, rather than the profits of the few, right? All those are valid. And, what is right and what is wrong is a matter of empirical research, in my opinion. Some things are appropriate and sometimes they're not. And we learn as we go along, and we're continually perfecting the way we try to organize society. Marx famously said that he doesn't want to write the recipes for the cookshops of the future. There isn't a list of things that you must do, otherwise not socialism. And Marx specifically said not to do that, and to be constantly pursuing egalitarianism, universalism, and democratic control, right? Like, come on, man.
Of all three kinds in the world. And if people want to think about how they work and what kind of society they produce, there's loads of evidence there. We don't have to hypothesize or pretend or demonize either, because really it doesn't lend itself to that if you're serious.
Okay, first of all, just because a government calls itself socialist, I don't think that that's adequate to define said government as socialist. Do you
Good.
agree
Give
with that?
another. Fine. You can have another. That's what the debate is about.
Let's just hold on one sec.
Well, do you,
Yeah, okay, so we have to give Destiny a chance to speak as well, because you
my
often have
question,
opportunities
like, in
to give.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I guess, like, would you consider, like, for instance, like the Nazi Party? Would you consider
Good
that
moderate.
a socialist party, as they have socialism in the name? It doesn't seem like a good.
They specifically disclaimed that they were socialist, that said they were opposed to socialism. They targeted social democrats, democratic socialists, and communists for extermination. This is conservative tier brain argument. They called it Judeo-Bolshevism.
No, but
Why not?
The minute you know anything about the Nazi Party, you'd understand that.
Would you say that is Portugal a socialist economy? Or do they have markets? Do they have private investment?
Markets have nothing to do with socialism.
Okay, can you tell me what is your definition of capitalism then? Because when I ask you what is socialism to you, I'm like, I understand that you can talk a lot and you can tell me what other people have considered socialism to be, but under your current definitions, for instance,
I gave you my definition.
Hold on, no, you haven't given me your definition. You've told me what other thinkers and what other countries in the past. Your definition.
Actually, he said that his definition was democratic control of the workplace. He said that he wants to move towards a type of socialism where firms are democratically controlled by the workers in them and not by a dictatorial few. He literally defined workplace democracy as his form of socialism. He wanted to transition to a place where workers control the workplace democratically, as opposed to having rules imposed upon them by the despotic private owners. He literally defined it. What is he talking about? He defined his own. He said workplace democracy. He honestly, the Nazis had socialism in the name is some middle school level argument. Embarrassing. Well, see, here's the thing that's amazing to me. Destiny brings up arguments that he doesn't agree with to make debate points. Destiny, do you think that the Nazis were socialists? No? Then why are you bringing it up? Like, what? Why would you bring up bullshit arguments you think are wrong? Dee's point was that the criteria Wolff was using to describe socialism wasn't adequate. He defined it clearly. Nazi Party doesn't fit into any of those three categories. He talked about three strains of socialist thought: social democrats, what are known as communists, and what his form of democratic socialism, worker cooperatives and worker management. He said those are three strains of socialism: reformists through social democracies who use regulation and government control, communists who advocate for direct control of the economy by government enterprise, and third, democratic socialists who advocate to transition to a worker managed economy. He literally gave three tendencies, and he called them all socialists and out of socialist thought. What's confusing? It was very clear. What are you confused about? He's saying that two are capitalism, not socialism. Okay. Well, now we need to watch the rest of the debate.
Portugal does, or it's not what the Portuguese socialist or communist parties. You're giving me what other people or other thinkers have thought what socialism is. Because under your current definition, number one, the Democratic Party in the United States would be considered a socialist party.
Okay,
because they're
we
in
covered the
favor of
Amish
heavy
community,
government
Chad. We
intervention
covered
in terms
it.
of climate change or healthcare. And I don't know if you would agree. Would you agree that the Democratic Party in the United States of America is a socialist party, or if they rebranded themselves? Okay, so it's clear then that the naming mechanism alone isn't enough for you, because the Nazi Party obviously called themselves socialists. I don't think many people, me included, would consider themselves socialists. And it's obvious that there must be some outside definition that you are alluding to, that when you call something socialist. So I'm just trying to figure out what can you tell me, what is capitalism to you? What does it mean when an economy or a society is a capitalist economy? What does that mean to you?
Well, let me
I think one of the things that's frustrating to me watching this debate is literally it's not a debate. Destiny has made no points. He's actually advanced no arguments. And a few arguments he did advance, I think Wolff destroyed. The idea that China grew because of capitalism, or the Soviet Union didn't grow because of socialism. I mean, those were so totally flattened, they're a fucking smear on the road. What arguments has he actually advanced? I haven't actually said much for much of this debate because, like, I wanted to analyze it, but Destiny's not making any arguments.
I gave you 3 definitions of socialism. I told you they weren't the only 3. This is a debate that's been going on inside socialism.
So what Wolff is saying is he's not the final arbiter of what socialism means. And he gave 3 policy prescription packages that various socialists have brought up, and they all have had successes, and they've all had failures. And he's saying that as a coherent socialist movement, we should acknowledge the failures and the successes of each argument.
It's perfectly reasonable for me to give you those 3.
Why are we watching this? Because I want to watch Professor Wolff. I like Professor Wolff.
For you, if there was one you could cling to, but that's not the way it is. The tradition is too big, too broad, too global for there to be one definition.
Perfect.
As there is in most interesting things in the world, and certainly in many large organizations and large traditions. I did give you my own. My own is focused on the transformation of the workplace. It's more interested in the micro transformation than in the macro ones, and particularly skeptical about the power of the government as having had some bad consequences. I want to learn from these early efforts to build socialism so that the future revolts against
there you go.
capitalism.
That's what I said earlier. I got it. I got what Wolff said. I guess we're super geniuses. DSA pundits in the chat, we are galaxy brains because we listened to what Wolff said and remembered it. It was completely clear.
Have a better outcome than the ones that we've already had.
What is capitalism?
Let me finish. They achieved many things we want to hold on to, and they made some mistakes we want to avoid. And that's exactly what it means to learn from.
I mean, Destiny getting butthurt that Wolff is talking more when all he did was ask questions is kind of like hilarious. Like when you ask questions of someone, they're gonna respond to your question. If you don't want questions, say a point, and then Wolff can debunk your point.
The past. Now let me address the question of capitalism. Here's what capitalism is not distinguished by, and therefore is not useful as a definition. Markets. Slavery has markets. It's a different economic system. Feudalism had markets for much of its history. That's not a definition of capitalism that's unique. Capitalism doesn't uniquely have markets. That's silly. Free or controlled markets, which is all we've ever had in the world, the controlled kind, are as old as Plato and Aristotle, who argued over markets. By the way, both of them opposed markets and thought they were socially destructive institutions. Just for as a footnote you might be interested in. But capitalism is unique in one way. It's not a system that's unique in its markets. It's not a system that's unique in its quote unquote free enterprises. Those are as old as Methuselah. But here is what's unique. Earlier systems, for example, slavery, organized the production of goods and services around a dichotomy, a slave and a master. The master owned all the equipment, all the means of production, and including the worker himself and herself. He owned them. And that was a very unusual way of organizing things, but it existed for a long time. Did it have markets? Often. Did it sometimes exist without markets? You bet. Then there's feudalism, radically different. No master, no slave. Nobody's anybody else's property. But you know how that works? You have a small group of lords at the top and a mass of serfs at the bottom. And the way the system works is that the serfs swear loyalty to the lord, and the lord in return to the serf. And the whole thing is sanctified in Europe by the Catholic Church.
Actually, this is important. Feudalism was a two-way contract. The feudal lord had obligations to their vassals. If you didn't fulfill those obligations, you would get overthrown. So yes, that's absolutely true. This is interesting because one of the things that capitalist defenders try to do is argue that a market equals capitalism, to try to naturalize it. But markets existed well before capitalism.
And then let me finish. Then comes capitalism. It's not a master and a slave. It's not a lord and a serf. It's a completely different arrangement. It's a contract. It's an employer and an employee. They don't swear anything to one another, and neither owns the other one. But they enter into a contract in which the employer says, I'm going to give you a wage at the end of the week. You're going to give me your brains and muscles for these hours of these days. And that's a deal we're going to make. And that's how we organize production. That's the distinction of capitalism.
He just defined capitalism as wage labor system, where private owners own capital, which is factories, workplaces, machines, land, and they hire wage workers to labor. And at the end of the laboring period, the capitalist owns the output and the laborer gets the agreed upon wage. That is a very coherent and easy definition of capitalism that fits to what happens to 99% of people today. What's the confusion? We can't say this guy's name in chat. Oh, yeah. Derek, fair enough.
What I mean by capitalism.
Just say Pepe Ladi.
You haven't given me a definition of capitalism at all. You've told me a bunch of things.
Yes, he just did! He said it was the wage relationship between private capital owners and workers who labor for a wage, and all of their output is owned by the capitalist. That is a unique system. He contrasted it between the feudal system and the slavery system. What are you what are you talking about? Is he deaf?
Capitalism isn't, and then you've given me a bunch of random collected facts of history, but none of these things
Not at all.
Absolutely.
What? He just said what it is. He said wage labor. This is the liberal debate lord? He didn't say the words. The definition of capitalism is wage labor between private capitalists and workers. I'll expand it upon you. If there's any Pepe Ladi fans in the chat who are having trouble understanding what Wolff is talking about. Capitalism is unique in that the entire output of the worker was owned by the capitalist, and the capitalist pays the worker wages. And the worker has to use their wages to survive. There is no obligation between the employer and the employee outside of the wage contract. And all of the output goes in the hands of the private capitalist. The private capitalist has no obligation to the worker outside of paying wages, which is different than feudalism. In feudalism, the serf had to promise a certain percentage of his output to the lord, but the lord also had to extend his protection and support to the serf. That was the two-way contract. If there's crop failures, the lord would provide for his serfs, because he had an obligation. An employer has no obligation. The serf kept a portion of his output. In capitalism, you don't agree. You don't get to keep a portion of your output unless the contract says. The standard form is you get paid wages. Your output goes to the owner. They have no obligation to you other than wages. That is a description of the means and mode of production. And he's distinguishing between the two different types. And just so you know, markets and economies existed before the contract wage labor system was predominant. This is actually embarrassingly easy. The lord owns the land and protects its serfs. The serfs work the land and pay a large portion of the lord. Usually it was like 10% of their output, and sometimes it would be higher. I remember in some feudal systems, they had to pay a 50% of output tax, and that was like rebellious because it was so overtaxed. The lord didn't own everything the serf produced? No. The Lord was promised a percentage, and the Lord would promise a percentage of his income to the person that was higher up than him. So like they would pay a percentage up the ladder. So that was the way that it worked. And they could raise the rate at what you owed, and that would be the tax increases that they would do. And also the serfs had obligations to serve the interests. Like they could be conscripted to serve in the militia or the military of their lord to defend it. Feudalism was an interlocking hierarchy of rights and obligations. Exactly. That's why it was so successful for so long, because it created stability and the relationships made sense. And it was sanctified, as he said, by a Catholic belief in the divine right of kings. Basically, the people set at the top were put there by God, and so you were serving God by serving your role and your function within society. And then there were obligations between the two. And the church served to mediate disputes between factions and also to promote what it called alms, or provision of services and support to poor people. And the church extracted wealth from all levels of society and provided and ministered to the people. That was why it was stable, because it had those four corners of rights, obligations, and provision. So that's why it lasted for like over 1,000 years in Western Europe.
Absolutely. For instance, when you talk about how markets aren't unique to capitalism, that's great. Worker management isn't unique to socialism. Worker management can exist under a capitalist system right now. I know that you like to talk about Mondragon a lot. Mondragon.
Let Destiny finish. Let
It's
Destiny finish.
It's Mondragon? It's Mondragon, isn't it? Is it Mondragon? I thought it was Mondragon. Or am I mispronouncing it too? You pronounce it correctly? Okay, good. Apparently I've read a book before and listened to a lecture before. You can't get mad at people for mispronouncing things? True. Okay, good point. I will not make any more pronunciation critiques.
Time here, okay? So let Destiny finish and then we'll continue.
When we talk about worker-managed firms or worker-managed co-ops, these things exist under capitalism.
Things existing under capitalism doesn't mean that it's not socialism. Capitalist, proto and capitalist things developed out of feudalism, which means during feudalism, proto-capitalist and capitalist stuff started to arise. I mean, so far, Destiny hasn't said anything of value. We're 39 minutes in, and I have yet to see it. If Destiny makes a good point, I'm going to acknowledge it. I am not going to just shit on Destiny for no reason. But he has to make a point. What Richard Wolff says is if we abolish private ownership, meaning we transferred the ownership of Amazon just to the people that work in it, there's no Jeff Bezos, that would be socialism to him. So what would that mean empirically in society? How much wealth would each of the workers of Amazon now get? If it was we kept everything, but when the company grew, it went to the workers instead of some guy. How much wealth? Bezos could give all Amazon workers $105,000 and still be as rich as pre-COVID. So in other words, if the wealth of Amazon was shared equally to all Amazon workers since the start of the pandemic, they each would have over $105,000. And Bezos would still have $130 billion. That's the exploitation that's happening. That's the value that's being produced by those Amazon workers. Maybe we should consider the fact that one guy getting $200 billion is bad. They did a similar analysis with Apple. Each worker would make $415,000. These are just examples. And what Wolff is saying is that we should do this. We should do this. Workers should get that $105,000, not Jeff Bezos. Keep everything else the same. Have Jeff Bezos not have all the money. Give the workers the money. You would probably be a 10K Andy if you didn't yell all the time. Did I yell? I'm confused. All right, well.
What are you saying then? Can I hold on real quick? I'm sorry. Can I get an explicit answer that is answered within the last 50 years without going back into feudalism or what the Pope said or the schism of the Catholic Church?
That's relevant. Wait. Okay, first of all, Wolff didn't bring up any of those things, although they would all be interesting historical facts to know to understand why European countries were structured the way they were, right? Like, you would want to know those things to look at the current history. Like, why has Yugoslavia had so many problems? Well, it goes back to religious conflicts during the Middle Ages and the Enlightenment. You had the Ottoman Empire's imperialist expansions. You had, the pushback. You had the remnant of the rump state of the Byzantine Empire and the Eastern Orthodox who split off from the Catholics. You had the Catholics from Croatia and Austria push back over against the Ottoman Empire, and Yugoslavia ended up to be this patchwork of pluralism of all these different religions and cultures colliding, which in the post-Soviet era, after socialism fell in Yugoslavia, these nationalisms rose. So you wouldn't be able to understand the political conflicts of Yugoslavia today if you didn't understand the schism of the Christian church, if you didn't understand the history of the medieval conflicts and the conflicts of the Renaissance. You wouldn't have an account for why we had conflicts today and crises today without that knowledge. How could you possibly argue history doesn't matter? The former Yugoslavia, yes, thank you. I'm just trying to understand the brain here. History is incredibly important. It's also why we know what works and what doesn't. We have to study it constantly. We have to constantly be refining what we do and don't do because of what happened in the past and the successes and failures. That's what we do. That's called human civilization. The experiments, the mistakes, the successes, the conflicts, they inform all of us where we are today. I'm now a nowist. I only believe in the present. The past doesn't exist.
I want to know very concretely, without moralizing or loading anything, or without talking about something that happened in 1850, what is capitalism to you?
I thought he was supposed to be the like pro-intellectual guy. I feel like there's a lot of insecurity here. It's not even really making me yell. It's more like, wow, this is like supreme insecurity. Dude, history is important.
Can you just tell me or explain what capitalism is? Because it sounds go ahead.
Any definition of anything is the process of separating it from that which it is not. That's all any definition ever was.
But we don't typically give definitions by naming every single thing.
Okay, let him answer. Let him answer.
A dog is you differentiate it from a cat. Otherwise, there's no way to do it. To differentiate and to give a definition of capitalism, you have to distinguish it from that.
But he did give definitions of capitalism. He talked about the wage labor system and private ownership of capital. He distinguished that from the formal integration of government and economy that took place in feudalism, where the serfs owed obligations to their baron, the baron owed obligations to the count owed obligations to the duke owed obligations to the king owed obligations to the emperor. That was the feudal hierarchy. And then he talked about the wage labor system and the contract system.
It is not. Those other systems didn't use an employer-employee relationship. That is the core distinguishing quality of capitalism.
He just defined capitalism as a economic system in which private capitalists employ workers in a contract wage system. That seems like a very coherent is Destiny saying that's not enough?
Slavery doesn't have that. Feudalism doesn't have that. And I never used the
Dukes
phrase
are higher than counts, Chad.
Management.
Barons are below
Managers
counts.
are not what we're talking
now you know.
about. Owning and operating. If you want to use a word, it's workers as their own boss, workers as their own board of directors. If you like, you can use the colloquialism in the United States.
Earls are the same as a count. Earl is an English word.
A worker co-op, a cooperative, one worker, one vote. All decisions, majority vote. That doesn't exist in capitalism. That exists in a different relationship among the people at the workplace. Not slavery, not feudalism, and not employer-employee, because those are different people.
There were counts more powerful than dukes, etc. It happened true.
Worker co-op, that's no longer the case. That's why it's a radically different socialist system, unlike any of the others.
How can you say that that's unlike any of the others when co-ops can exist today under capitalist economies?
Slavery can exist and did in our...
A margrave is just somebody who has, I believe a margrave is someone who has a border with a foreign power. Am I right, chat? This is, I might not be getting all my feudalism facts correct.
You're not answering my question. I want you to give me the negative of everything I'm saying. You're saying today that this is a unique thing that exists.
There's never been a problem in any society of which we have historical record for different class structures, different systems to coexist. You're asking me a question as if it were...
A margrave was originally the medieval title for the military commander assigned to maintain the defense of one of the border provinces of the Holy Roman Empire or of a kingdom. Oh, okay, so I was right. Marquis might be the French version of it. Gotcha. Okay, so I was right.
Is this
Thank
possible?
you.
It's never been anything other than the norm.
But you're telling me that in your society, or I could be wrong, you can correct me, but it sounds like in your society, you would exclusively like firms to be in.
It's very important. If somebody was a border lord, then they were more important than somebody who wasn't. Because if you're on the border, you need to have more of a military presence and more fortifications and more investment to protect from foreign invasion. So you had to be a more important person necessarily. This is in part of politics.
In the hands of workers, which would necessarily preclude.
Not at all. Right. I've never written that. I've never said it. You're just attributing things to me.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying very hard to understand what you're saying, but the problem is your answers are very long-winded. You're not really answering my question. So, am I to understand then that you are in favor of a society where workers have the option to vote on?
It is interesting that D here just smugly laughs and thinks he knows exactly how linguistic meaning works. Wolff is invoking the idea from a post-structuralist linguistics that meaning is difference. Hence, the idea that you can only define something by locating it in a network of differences by what it is not. This view might be wrong, but it's not ridiculous or wrong on its face. D did not get this did not get to this part of Wikipedia yet. Also, he did define capitalism with specific features that are unique to it, right? But he also contrasted it with other economic systems that have come before.
and have control over the workplace, but there's also room for private investment, and the government intervenes in things like healthcare or education. Is this like the type of society you're aiming for?
My guess would be that the transition from capitalism to what I'm talking about would have long periods of time, typically, where these different class structures, these different systems coexist with one another.
That's what we have today.
No, you don't have it in anything like the way I want it.
Well, how do you want it? What's different from your vision than what we have today?
Well, what we have today is predominantly capitalist with smatterings of the other. I'm interested in having predominantly socialist with smatterings of the other. That's the difference.
And without disallowing private investment or disallowing individual owners, how do you get there?
Private investment is a completely different matter. You can have private investment and worker co-ops.
How?
It exists. What's the problem? Why would I
ever invest in a company without gaining some amount of equity in the company?
So here's what Destiny doesn't understand. The workers produce surplus, right? They produce more value than it is necessary for their own subsistence and support. So think about a group of carpenters. They go and build a bunch of houses and they get paid to build those houses. And they share the profits equally with one another. The surplus is given back to the worker. They get more value than what they put in, right? And it goes to them. They can then say, hey, let's expand the guild hall. Let's buy new drills. Let's buy new equipment. And they're investing privately into the firm that they work collectively at. That would be private investment. Now, what Destiny is saying is, I want to be able to give money to someone and get a share of the profits without working in this inside the firm. That's what he's asking for. He wants to be able to sit on his ass while a bunch of other people go and work for him. And we are saying that really leads to terrible outcomes and accumulations of wealth that are not good. And we shouldn't do that. That doesn't mean there's no private investment or no investment. That just means we don't think somebody should take a share of the profits without doing a share of the work. We do politics here every morning starting at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. You can watch us here on Twitch. We're the morning guy, the morning politics guy, Politics Frogs, in every single day, same time, 10 a.m., day in, day out. And we carry you through your morning and early afternoon politics needs. And if you need more, Mike from PA, we have a YouTube channel. We talked about suburbs, the My Pillow guy, Ted Cruz. We talked about DSA. Amazing. Making fun of Tim Pool. Amazing. Look at all of these amazing videos. Get in there, watch them. We have me on Twitter. You got to follow me on Twitter, chat. I'm at 20,614 subs. That means I got like 40 followers on Twitter in the last day. You can do better than that. You can do better than that. Go follow us on Twitter. And of course, join the Discord, where we have an incredible community of left-wing streamers. We have left-wing community. We talk about the stream. We talk about politics. There's gaming content. It's a really awesome, supportive place. Direct action, mutual aid, and you can just let off some steam. And also, you can help produce the show. One of the things I do is I look at the links that are put into the news content suggestions chat room on the Discord. Join the Discord. Come hang out. And maybe what you want me to talk about will be part of the next show.